Hello, welcome to the International Physical Literacy Association podcast. My name is Kirk Bowyer, and if you are a teacher, coach, a parent, or someone who wants to know more about physical literacy, this podcast is for you because an understanding of physical literacy is absolutely vital to our own health, our families, our communities. And today, I'm really pleased to welcome Professor Rebecca Lloyd to the podcast. Rebecca is a professor at the University of Ottawa and a real leader, actually, in the field of movement and physical literacy. Welcome, Professor Rebecca.
Thank you very much for this invitation.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. It's actually the first time I think that the podcast has gone beyond the UK to Canada. So amazing. So, firstly, we always start with this. Can you give your definition of physical literacy in under 30 seconds?
Well, I know there's a consensus statement, so it's about the motivation, the confidence, the competence, and the understanding to be active for life. And that's I think the essence of it is that it's multidimensional because that definition means that you have the emotional aspect. So um, when you think about movement, you wanna generate a love for it so that it comes from a desire to be active, and so when you're looking at physical literacy, it's not a have to, I have to move, or I have to do this, or I have to go to the gym and treat my body like an object, like a thing. From a physical literacy, perspective, that motivation is key, meaning you wanna feel, alive, you wanna feel connected to your breath. And then when you think about the intellect, the mind is embodied. So when you're physically literate, it's the understanding. So there's a cognitive role to understand that this is important to be active, but you could still conceivably not be physically literate and understand that it's important to be active. But from an embodied philosophical framework, the mind is part of the experience itself, so that there's an alertness, there's a consciousness. So you have an innate desire, a love, a passion to move. And then when you're experiencing the movement, you're not thinking of your grocery list or all the other tasks. You're actually in the moment itself. So that the cognitive component is embodied. It's in the present moment. And that's a big shift. A lot of people will treat their body like an object or a thing, and oh, I have to be active for all of these external reasons. But when you come at it from the motivation and the cognitive understanding, you're in the moment fully. And then what's really interesting to see is the social dimension of physical literacy come into the fore, which is where my research has been focused, is that you're relationally connected. And so that relational connection is with yourself, as I just talked about, but it's also with the world. So if you're walking outside or even if you're inside, you're feeling connected to whether it's the floor, like as a dancer, the surface of the floor is what we all talk about when we go and compete. So the floor matters. It's that sense of if it's outside the world, so the world pushing up into you just as much as you push down into the world. So there's a relational connection, maybe what you're hearing. So instead of having, I know everyone's probably listening to this podcast right now, but if you're moving and you're listening to something else, there's a little bit of dissonance or bifurcation of focus. So to be fully physically literate means that you're hearing the sounds of either the wind. So if you're skiing, you're
Yeah.
connecting to the sound of the movement, or if you're a dancer, you're hearing the rhythm, so that the sound is connected, what you're seeing is connected. It's a full sensory relational experience, whether it's with nature, with others, or yourself. And for me, those are all the elements of physical literacy that make it a really exciting phenomenon and a real shift in the way we understand and teach movement.
That was amazing. Our founder of the IPLA, Professor Margaret Whitehead, I, um, I recently reread a lot of her stuff actually, and I think there's a lot of what you just said echoing within that.
Yes. Yes, I met Margaret Whitehead when she came to Canada, and she introduced the concept of physical literacy, and at that time, I was just a recent graduate. I was working for PHE Canada with their journal because I had a little bit of a gap between securing a position that I have now. And so I worked with our Physical and Health Education Canada Association, and she was our big guest. I think it was the year maybe 2006, 2007? I can't remember the exact year, but she made a ripple, like, she came in with the concept of physical literacy, and then, of course, because she came from an embodied philosophical framework, I just, went to town. Because when you're a young doctoral student and you're so excited about you found another person who speaks this language, no, we had a lot of great discussions that continued so much that she invited me, to the second official meeting of the IPLA, and I was a keynote speaker, and it was just an excitement about this embodied philosophy that a lot of people I'm thinking, like, they just kind of cut off because, "Oh, okay, it takes a little bit of time to think about it." But to me, that's what makes physical literacy so exciting, is when you understand this big philosophical shift.
It is, and it's that's why I went back to reread a lot of her stuff because, um, it is a philosophical shift, and it's interesting you say about the sounds when physical activities. Um, because I actually used to run or walk with earphones in and listen to podcasts or music. But I recently, well, not that recently, a few months ago, started taking that out and actually become more aware of the environment that I was running in, like you were saying. Um, can you explain why is particularly important?
Well, it's not just like, entertainment. To hear the sound of your step,
Yeah.
says a lot about the way you move. For example, if you're stomping around the house, and this is where, I'll talk a little bit about my mom, because my mom wanted to dance and wanted to move, but because of the circumstance, she had a single mom. Her father died in the war, uh, didn't have the money to go into dance lessons. And so
Okay.
I know that she's open to movement, to learn to move, but she doesn't have that background in movement. So when my mom walks from one spot to the other in the house, uh, she's kind of flat-footed and kind of loud, and she's got some hip problems. So what I say to my mom gently is, well, if you soften the sound of your walking, and I just start with the sound, right? If you lighten up and it doesn't make such a big noise, your hips are gonna feel better because that force is gonna change. And so sometimes when we teach movement, like we teach people how to jump, for example, as a dancer, you're gonna jump, and if it's a silent landing, that means so much is happening in terms of that eccentric, muscular
Yeah.
activation and control.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I could come up with a checklist of all of these things like align your knees, look at your posture, use your core, blah, blah, blah. But if I just said, could that be a silent jump? Or could we make that walk quieter? And we go from that sensory cue. So much is happening. And then that refinement of movement is kind of part of that listening, that deep listening, and the qualitative aspect of that movement could inherently change and grow just from paying attention to how we sound in the movement itself.
Yeah, that's so right. And because we have we have a business aside from my involvement in the RPLA, and we have children as young as 1 and 2 in our classes, and we do this thing where there's a sleeping animal or a sleeping postman, for example, and that's the coach. You don't want to wake them up, and if you say, right, we're going to be super quiet, their movement actually changes as
Yeah.
well,
Oh, yeah.
just by and just by that cue of listening and being aware of what quiet is, I suppose, when you're moving. Yeah.
I also think about like the trace, right? So if you think of, I wrote in the physical literacy article, a long time back, I was very much inspired by David Abram, who writes about the spell of the sensuous, and he was talking about the alphabet. And so when we think about physical literacy and language and writing, we might want to think of our movement in a way as writing an expression, this interconnection with the world. So to look at your footsteps, for example. And what could we learn if we could really read a trace? And then we are connected to an indigenous way of connecting or understanding the world. And if you look at the actual animate life in the letters themselves, what an A means, O, and I started to look at the etymology of the letters and the understanding. There's so much life in every single letter and every single sound that we sometimes think of letters or literacy as a visual phenomenon, but there's sound to each. We used to have an oral culture. Now the screen, we're kind of disconnected from that, but we also have a very physical connection to how we write and move on the earth. So, for example, if you just looked at the articulation of your foot and where the pressure is, like if instead of being on a treadmill that's mechanistic, if you were to go out in the soft, muddy earth and look at the articulation of your foot, you could understand, how are you standing? How are you moving in the world? What's that telling you in terms of am I outer on the outer edge of my foot? Am I on the inner edge of my foot? Am I using my whole foot? What's the push off like? And then you could take that into other sports. Like when I used to work with figure skaters, like in a spin, they would look at the trace they would leave on the ice to look at how are they using their edges, what's their balance like. If you're a skier, you could look at the tracks or the tracing you're leaving in the snow, so that this physical literacy could be understood physically, with a full sensory experience.
Feels though we need to go back and talk about you and your background now.
Okay.
Yeah. What was your, what's your background? What was your training? Did you go to where did you go to university? How's and then what was it? Just give us a bit of a brief outlook of your career and your
Oh,
research.
well, that's a massive question.
It is,
Uh,
yeah. Because I've
well,
seen what you've I've seen
yeah.
your career. It could be a really big one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would say my first love has been dance. And that you could probably tell from the way I answer a question that I'm still a dancer. It's the way I
Yeah.
think, it's the way I move, it's the way I articulate. And so for a dancer, movement isn't, disconnected. You're very much that emotional register, how you're feeling, that spiritual side. As a dancer, movement isn't a deep expression of who you are in the world. And even if you stop dancing, you could probably visually identify a dancer just by their stance, their posture. So for a dancer, um, how you stand, where your head is, where your fingertips are, there's such a deep kinesthetic register to movement, that it's a beautiful art form to have. So that's my background is ballet. I left home at age 15. By 17, I was training in Montreal, and that's all I wanted to be. I didn't want school. I didn't even finish high school. I was just training to be a dancer. And I went as far as I could, and it was a competitive program with Les Grands Ballets Canadiens. And we also had to do cégep, so history of ballet, and there was a university course with UQAM. And they realized I was an academic. I got close to 95% in that course, and then they were looking at my career prospects because it's really hard to secure a job. You need to have a certain foot, a certain shape of leg. I didn't have the perfect ballerina physique, and when they saw this potential, I was advised to go. Well, consider university, consider an academic. I was like, no, I just want to dance. And so the decision was made for me. I was heartbroken. So it was a huge, huge letting go of what I call my first love. And so I had to keep moving. And instead of seeing myself as a professional dancer training 7, 8 hours a day, slowly decline, it's like breaking up with a lover. I had to stop and I needed to keep moving. So I went to aerobics and I did a science degree because at Carleton University, I didn't want to go back to high school and finish high school. That was not motivating, but they had a qualifying year. So I did a science degree and I thought, okay, maybe I'll be a doctor like my dad and just take a bunch of science courses. And I turned to fitness and took aerobics classes to keep moving. And I thought, what is this? Everyone's so excited, like you're just clapping your hands or doing a grapevine. And at that point, like aerobics was huge. Like, I don't know if you know, we wore leg warmers, we had
Yeah.
headbands, we
Yeah.
had neon suits with the thongs on the back. I don't know why we wore those things, but it was awesome. And then it became my part-time job. And then I was quickly, because of my dance background, I became an instructor and then an instructor of instructors because I would naturally help my friends with the rhythm and the movement. And it was just, fun. And I competed and I thought, well, this is really interesting. And then to prepare for the competitions, I read sports psychology, Terry Orlick's books. And I thought, for the first time, it was as if I wrote the book myself. Everything I read from a sports psychology perspective was what I knew from my ballet training, and I wanted to meet the author of these books. And so, even though I finished my science degree and I thought, okay, I'll be a fitness instructor, and I found my path, um, I wanted to learn more about the mental side of sport preparation. And as soon as Terry met me and we had a discussion, he encouraged me to, become a special student and take his course. And then one thing led to another, and I eventually did a master's degree. I did a case study on him working with Olympic level athletes. And then I thought, this was so fantastic. It should be accessible to all children in schools, not just elite level athletes whose parents can afford to put them in high level sport, because I applied it to the figure skaters I worked with. And then I thought, okay, if I want to create, this positive thinking strategy and way of experiencing movement from a sports psychology perspective, I need a PhD. Because at that point, I was already working with teachers, I was doing workshops in school, but I recognized to really make that ripple, I needed more education. And so the person who never finished high school, I wrote that on my vision board, like, do a PhD to blah, 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 blah. And then sure enough, um, I never thought of myself that way, but I just did what I had to do. And went to Simon Fraser University where I met Stephen Smith, and he's the person who shifted me from that cognitive orientation in sports psychology to the embodied philosophy. And he has a wonderful background. He also was interested in flow and positive movement experience, but more holistically and more connected to education. So I started my work with Stephen Smith and finished a PhD. And then from that point, I was really excited about applying this not only to the general public through my work in the gyms and with the adult community, but also with the figure skaters that I was coaching at that time, but children in schools and working with physical educators as well. So at that point, I was really excited about the potential, and it took me a few years to find the job, but I got a full-time professor job at the University of Ottawa in the Faculty of Education, where they embraced this holistic philosophy.
Oh, that's amazing. It sounds like because it sounds like you could really identify what physical exercise brings you joy from a real early age, especially with ballet, dance, aerobics. Even now, like you've just come on that you just before we came on to the podcast, you said, "Oh, I've just been out cross country skiing," right? Cross
Yeah.
country skiing. Um, what role do you think finding that joy plays in whether someone stays active long term?
Oh, it's essential. In fact, that's the heart of the research. I have a 3-year grant, partnership grant with the International Council of Active Aging, and that's my research question is joy in active aging, and how is that cultivated, in a community setting? And, it's so exciting when you spend time, with older adults who have found a way, because let me tell you, the older you get, the more aches and pains we experience.
Yeah. Yes.
And you can't take joy for granted. You actually have to prioritize it. It means that you're taking care of yourself. So, if it hurts to move, and it's taking away from your joy, then okay, well, take care of that shoulder. What could I do to see a physio, or to have some maintenance exercises? Or a lot of the time, it's like Terry Orlick. He wrote this little book about running and life lessons, and one of them was like, if you have a little rock in your shoe, how many people just keep going with that tiny little rock in their shoe and not have a great walk? But if you stop and you take that little pebble out, and you put your shoes on, your foot feels better, and then the walking feels better, and you have more joy. So it's not like separate from the movement. To me, if you understand education as a progressive phenomenon, the more you, even if it's something as simple as walking, or the way we sit in a chair, or the way we stand, if we pay attention to the nuances of it with the goal to reduce extra effort, right? So if we're driving and our shoulders are up to our ears, that driving is going to be stressful. But if we are able to, oh, I'm aware my shoulders are creeping up. Oh, a long neck. Change the way I breathe. Let go of residual tension, and I enhance that. Whether it's the way I sit, stand, walk, move. If I enhance that, qualitatively speaking, it's going to feel better. And
Yeah.
and that means that there's more inherent joy in the way we move, not as an extra byproduct, like a lot of people go, "Yeah, it's over. I did my 20 minutes. Woohoo! Now I can be happy." Well, how about being happy in the 20 minutes and have that as your goal?
Yes. So let's talk about schools then.
Okay.
On that. Let's talk because I want to go through the age ranges here. So let's talk
Yeah.
about schools. What's one small change schools could make that would have a big impact on physical literacy, physical activity? Yeah.
A lot of it, like, it depends where you go to school.
Yeah.
And the time, like something as simple as timetabling. So when I worked with grade 7 and 8 students in a climbing study, and I talked with the principal, because when you do a research grant, you have to get permission, from the school board, from the principal, then you talk to the teachers, and then you slowly take those steps in the door. Um, you find out, how often physical education is scheduled. And at this grade 7 and 8 school, St. Patrick's here in Ottawa, they have daily physical education classes because um, the school principal believed in the importance of movement. And so it was a foundational tenet of that school. And when I came in, it was, like, fully embraced, and I felt, welcomed. When my sons were at an elementary school where I lived in Chelsea, I asked about physical education. Could I volunteer? Could I get involved? And, their experience was very different. They only timetabled it 2 or 3 times a week, and, then, my older son, has some special needs. Uh, so one of the things was he wasn't able to, predict force when you'd throw a ball. And so because the teacher thought he wasn't safe, he sat him out. So me as a researcher had a son in grade 4 who would be sitting on a bench in physical education class because they weren't able to give them a softer ball, like give them a beach ball, give them a Nerf ball, give them something safe so that if it whacks around, it doesn't hurt anybody. And to me, that's the big shift is number one, make time for it. Schedule it every single day and school hours. So it's not just a recess, it's not just a before or after, it's a during the school day. So you can see the role that physical education plays when you look at the timetable. So that's step one, make time for it. And then step two, individualize it so that if you have people coming into your class, children, that you have a sense of preferences, a sense of choice, and different ways of engaging in an activity, like something as simple as a walk. You could walk in a hip hop way, you could walk briskly, you could count the steps. There's so many ways to do a physical activity, and sometimes we just think in one and we try and get everybody to do it the same way. And when we look at some of the resources for physical literacy, like how to throw a ball or how to catch a ball, that have kind of gotten a lot of traction, fundamental movement skills, there's a lot of ableism. So you see certain bodies performing movements, and it's almost like as if there's a right way or a wrong way. And honestly, I think if we're going to go back to the original definition of physical literacy, it's that how can we co-create? How can we be creative? And how do we use our imagination? And so that if we have a movement where it might be a softer or a lighter movement or a louder movement, or if we can express movement in different ways and find a way and help the children to be part of that, how are we going to play this game so no matter where you're at in terms of your movement, maybe you're in a wheelchair, maybe you have a foot injury, maybe you have an arm injury. Everybody's got something going on at some point. It's not sitting them out, it's finding a way that's comfortable and having a conversation so that we can all participate in a way that's embraced. And so I think that would be my second recommendation. First, schedule time. Second, give options and let the child become part of that option.
I absolutely love that. And I think that one thing that was going through my mind then is that I think our schools in the UK anyway have become very obsessed, and this is not a dig at the schools, this is just how it is that very obsessed with competency. How to play a specific sport, how to kick a ball, how to and I think that that was certainly the case when I was growing up. So I'm 43 now, so it was quite a long time ago. But certainly the case when I was growing up, and I was lucky, I suppose, that I enjoyed the sports that I was being taught, and there were only a few. And when you said options, I was thinking there wasn't a huge amount of options. And then I compare myself with my best friend, who's still my best friend, even from school. He didn't find joy in any of those things. He did, and there wasn't enough options. There wasn't enough imagination, creative um, parts of our curriculum that enabled him to find that. And as a result, his life is is relatively inactive in compared to mine. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I
So
think there is a lot of emphasis on games and sports and physical education. And if you're going to keep that up for life, that means you have to find a sport club or
yeah.
or to have this team mentality. And not everybody finds that exciting. Some people are intimidated. So if you have choice, then you're helping build something for life, something that you love, something that might take some time to research. And there's all kinds of fun things on the internet now, like, different ways to juggle or use poi or maybe move with the hula hoop. That was one project I did, which was so much fun. It was a hula hoop project, believe it or not. I I wrote papers about what
Wow.
it's like to shift
Yeah.
a jumping through a hoop phenomenon, right? Like thinking of the objective end result to getting inside the hoop and lingering and moving and hooping not just being around your waist. When you look at it from an indigenous perspective, there's hoop dancing, and you learn about the medicine wheel and about the meaning of the circle, and what you put into something is what you put out, and that whole sense of holistic connection and movement. This hoop phenomenon was just so interesting because at first I was just wanting to promote joy, like let's hula
Yeah.
hoop. Um, but the more we spent time in the practice, and you can hoop with it around your head, you can shift it around your body, you can go on your arms, and it could become like a butterfly if you have lots of hoops. It could uh, take in all these different forms. When you bridge, what we think in the West is hula hooping with an indigenous perspective of hoop dancing, really fascinating results. And we developed a practice with some Bachelor of Education, teacher education students in our hallway. And I had to get special permission from my dean to hula hoop in our lobby because, movement, we always like, you have to move in a certain way. You can go in an elevator, you can go up the stairs, but you can't hula hoop. And so I had to advocate that we could play music and hula hoop in my lobby because we were raising money for a charity, and that's how I got away with it. But it just goes to show you that something as simple as frolicking and moving requires, safety or authority or permission, and then at the same time a practice. So when you really understand movement as an evolving phenomenon,
Yeah.
it gets exciting. You can get curious and then you can find your way. Like when you think about figure skaters, all those jumps often are after someone's last name, right? Because they were creative enough to find a new way to jump. And then all of a sudden we got, the Soko or whatever the jump is, or in
Yeah.
golf, like there's always one person that's decided to pursue it for such a long time that they put their signature on it, when you write your way in the world. And sometimes we just take that knowledge as if it's always been there. But some people really started to create, and you even have movements named after them, right? So I think let's get creative, let's get curious, and let's find more interesting ways to move in the world. Why not?
The hula hoop, is that still out there? Like, the curriculum that you built there for the hula, is that still out there? 'Cause that sounds fun.
Was a fantastic, and my student teachers made resources. I could send you some articles and resources that we made because that's what I like to do. I like to bridge fun, active resources. So you have the practical, and then to write about it philosophically. What does it mean? And what's the deep meaning? And so for my teacher education students who are learning to teach, when they started to think about teaching, they were very much rigid, like, oh, I stand at a board and I impart knowledge and it's a linear input output. But let me tell you, when you start hula hooping with students and moving, there's fluidity, there's laughter, there's flexibility, and it it changed the way they move in the world and the way they understand their relational way of connecting with their students. So after hula hooping with students, their way and their manner, shifted. So when they were in the classroom, they were more apt to crouch down, to go, and chat with students, at the same level. They weren't stuck at the board. They weren't like anxious. When you look at all those anxious movements of daily life, they were actually more animate, more connected, more relationally attuned. And so a movement practice can really shift the way you relate and teach, and it can be part of that teaching phenomenon. And it all came from hula hooping as a practice that we did together and that we shared with students in schools.
It's incredible how that leads to other things like connecting and yeah, it's fantastic. Do you think that can someone rebuild their relationship with movement later on in life? Because I find that I think I've had to rebuild that myself since turning 40. I can't quite do the tennis singles, for example. That's beyond me now. Do you think How do we do that? How do we rebuild our relationship with movement as we get older?
Well, first of all, I would, if I really had time with you, I would be curious about what you just said. I
Okay.
can't. And I would I would start there with language,
Okay.
because we put so many ageist limits on ourselves, in the way we talk about ourselves. And when we look at ageism and physical activity, we're the worst in terms of being ageist when we think about our own trajectories. Like, I can't do it. I'm too old. When we say I'm too old, what does that mean? I'm tired. Okay, well, maybe we need more rest, or this hurts. Okay, so maybe I need to engage in some rehabilitative movement, or get a professional on my team. And the real shift from physical literacy, if you look at the research, like physical literacy in a school context, involves typically the teacher in the school, the administration and the policy, and the student curriculum, and connection to parents at home. But as we get older, physical literacy, the team has to grow. So the team includes a medical professional, for example, rehabilitation professional, so that we can't just do it all on our own, right? It means that we're understanding that, okay, just like, do we complain about brushing our teeth? And if a tooth falls out, we understand, oh, I need to go see the dentist. I need to brush my teeth. I need to floss my teeth. We kind of understand that we take care of our teeth. Um, but why do we not take care of our muscles or our strength or our flexibility? It's kind of like we take our body, when it breaks down, we pay attention to it. But if it's working, we kind of have it taken for granted, assumption of movement. Well, I think it would be essential that we leave school with some foundational things, like how do we open up through the chest? Like when we look at the posture of everyday life, that's pretty much what we get from texting or computing. So, basic, how do we open up our chest? How do we build lens strength? So I look at older people and leveraging, to get out of a chair. I look at my mother and the forward flexion and the upper body usage, to and I say, okay, well, let's make that a game, because it's hard. It's hard to help your mom, right? Your parent,
Yeah.
you, but
Yeah.
I have to find a nice way. And then it's like, well, here, let's give me a high five. Could you give me a high five as we stand up, to just shift, right? Shift the focus, make it fun. Um, but getting up, daily life movement, are we curious? Are we fascinated, or do we take it for granted? And if we're curious, could we then pay attention to the way we're engaging, our alignment, our like, I always think, what's foundational? How do we walk? How do we move? How do we sit? How do we stand? And what's that sense of alignment? And so to take care of ourselves means that we have enough time in our lives to pay attention to keep those foundational ways of moving, running smoothly, if you will. And um and I think, if we, like, for example, I've had frozen shoulder, I've had a back injury that set me out for 9 months. I even had a concussion for 2 years. And I was told, my goals were too high. When I had my rehabilitation team telling me, oh, well, just focus on spelling or writing. And I'm like, well, I'm going to publish again in a peer reviewed paper there. And I'm going to compete at the, national salsa competition. And at that point, I could barely, turn my head or shift. They were looking at me like, your goals are not aligned with where you're at. But I knew that I was going to dance and move again, and it was a priority, and then I was gonna write again and talk again in certain ways. And the only way you're going to actually keep doing the things that you love is that if you carve out time in your busy life, to do those things, and then to think about the experience of doing them in a certain quality, in a certain way, so that it's not just done like a check mark, but that you connect to yourself and who you are in and through these movements. Because if you just start paying attention when you're 70, it's too late. Your posture could be frozen in a certain way. Uh, if we pay attention to how we move, and the language, how we talk to ourselves, anything is really possible.
That's such a great. I feel like I could talk to you all day, and I haven't stopped smiling since you've started talking. It's been absolutely unbelievable, really inspirational. Where can we go to see more of your more of your more of Professor Rebecca Lloyd? Where can we go to see more of your recommendations, your advice?
Well, I have a website and I have some social media. I know I need to do more in that way. So thank you for this opportunity to be part of this experience. My website is function, the number two, flow.ca. So
Okay.
function2flow.ca. And I also have interactive with the number four life. So interactive for life. That's my Instagram handle. And
Okay.
of course, my graduate students help me with that. But
Just, we'll put
yeah,
the links actually in
yeah.
the um in the little snippets that we have, and also in the podcast, so everyone can go there to visit that. Just talk to me a bit about your website. What is on the website? What can we find on there?
Well, I've kind of organized it with little tabs around some of the things I do. So, for example, if you want to study with me and do a master's or a PhD, I've accumulated what I call a research unit because I like to build connections among my grad students so that they feel supported by each other. And so we have regular meetings and then a bunch of resources and a bunch of activities. So, for example, writing and moving. We have fun things to do. So, if you want to understand the function to flow framework, function, form, feeling, flow, there's activities that, from drinking a morning coffee, how you might pay attention to the way you pick it up to move to that sense of form or the feeling of it. And then exercises that help you go from the physical experience to writing in a way that picks up that movement sensitivity. So I've engaged in what's called motion sensing phenomenology, which is a branch of phenomenology that's geared towards people who want to learn to write in a way that picks up the feeling of movement. So that's my area of research. So I have a little tab for the research unit, if that's your interest. I also have an active aging tab. And so that's in the process of development because that's where I'm at right now. And I have some YouTube, so joy in active aging and also about wellness. So I have some YouTubes. I have some activities you could do with older adults and some articles that are brewing that are being listed in that pod. I have an interactive for life tab where I actually interviewed elite partnered sport educators. So, acro yoga. So, instead of doing yoga as an individual, what's it like to experience that in connection? Tai Chi push hands, which is a martial art, equestrian arts, and salsa dance, of course, because I'm a dancer. And
Right.
so I have resources that mobilize that into generic activities you can teach in school. So you might not have access to a horse, or you might not have access to, doing acro yoga or salsa dance, but we developed, my student teachers and we developed resources that would take that sense of relational connection in and through movement to regular games and sports and activities you could do, say, in a gym or a school setting.
Wow. Okay. Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's another tab. And then, the tab I did where I was looking at flow sports, so like hooping or climbing,
Yeah.
because I had a study that looked at indoor climbing and how do you learn in and through that movement. I developed resources and some videos, and that was the birth of the function to flow framework in the physical education context. So I have, if you look at the website, I have different tabs and then I have a tab about me, and then a tab about my research partner, Stephen Smith, where you might look at our bios or some of the publications that we've done over the years. So I have a combination of videos, of resources, and articles. And to me, that if you're into physical literacy, it's important to have the practical with the physical, with the intellectual, and to showcase that.
Amazing. Well, Professor Rebecca Lloyd, thank you so much. It's been fantastic. I'm off to look at everything on your website and learn. And so thank you again. It's been fantastic.
Well, thank you very much. I look forward to meeting you in person one day because I was
Yeah.
actually born in England, and
Right.
I have cousins there. I love to visit, and I'm also open to feedback. So, if you have suggestions for my website, or if you have people listening to what I'm talking about, I'm always open to learn and improve and to connect or share what we're talking about in different ways. So just want to say a huge thank you for inviting me to be part of this podcast today.
No problem. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks. Okay, bye.